What if I told you that everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle could be about to unravel in ways so shocking, so devastating, that even the most seasoned royal watchers would be left speechless? That one of the most notorious figures of the 21st century, someone whose name alone has sent shivers through the corridors of power, has stepped forward to reveal secrets that could forever alter the narrative of Meghan, Prince Andrew, and the British royal family? That figure is none other than Ghislaine Maxwell, and what she claims to have witnessed is not something you will read in tabloids, hear whispered in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, or find in sanitized biographies. No, this is raw. This is devastating. This is the truth, or at least the truth according to someone who was closer to the epicenter of one of history's most shocking scandals than anyone alive today. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the first moment Meghan Markle stepped into the royal spotlight, whispers followed her like shadows. Rumors, innuendos, and unverified stories swirled around her, each more salacious than the last. Yet nothing could prepare the public for what Maxwell is now claiming. According to her account, Meghan's interactions with Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein were not only intimate but occurred under circumstances that, if true, would cast a permanent shadow over her legacy. Imagine a scene so private, so controlled, so calculated, and yet so public in its impact that it sends shockwaves through the monarchy, through media, and through the very fabric of the elite social circles. Picture it. Do you feel that knot in your stomach? That's just the beginning. Why does this matter now? Because timing is everything. Maxwell has been behind bars for years, facing the weight of justice and the echoes of her own choices. Her revelations, coming at this moment, are not random. They are deliberate, precise, and engineered to shatter illusions. Think about it. Someone who survived the twisted games of Epstein, maneuvered through courts, interrogations, and public scrutiny, is now choosing to speak. And she chooses to speak about Meghan Markle. Why? What is the motive? And most importantly, what does she know that could rewrite the story we thought we knew about the Duchess of Sussex? Let's step back for a moment and set the stage. Maxwell was not just a companion to Epstein. She was his lieutenant, his confidant, his gatekeeper, and according to several accounts, the architect of some of the most disturbing elements of his network. Her proximity to power, political, financial, and social, was unparalleled. She knew secrets that could topple careers, ruin reputations, and expose the darkest corners of the elite. And in that shadow, according to her claims, Meghan Markle entered a scene she may have never fully understood, a scene involving Prince Andrew and Epstein himself. Maxwell, as an eyewitness, asserts she saw interactions that were intimate, interactions that were calculated, interactions that were potentially catastrophic if exposed. Think about the implications. Prince Andrew, who has already been publicly scrutinized for his connections to Epstein, allegedly engaging in behavior in front of Maxwell, someone who had the knowledge, the audacity, and the leverage to expose it all, paints a scene rife with scandal. And then there is Meghan. How does a newly arrived royal figure navigate a world so complex, so dangerous, that even seasoned insiders tread carefully? What choices did she make? What lines did she cross? Maxwell's testimony suggests a level of involvement that is both shocking and meticulously orchestrated. Now, consider the stakes. The British royal family is not just a family, it is an institution, a symbol, a global brand. Reputation is everything. And in the world of the royals, perception often outweighs reality. If Maxwell's claims gain traction, the consequences are monumental. Public trust is fragile. Media scrutiny is relentless. And the whispers, can turn into a roar. Maxwell, sitting behind bars, knows this. She also knows that revealing even fragments of what she witnessed can send ripples across continents. This is why she chose now, and why you, as the audience, need to pay attention. Let's talk about credibility for a moment. Maxwell has been convicted, yes. She has a complicated past, but her proximity to the events she describes gives her a perspective few others could claim. She was there. She saw the interactions. She understands the power dynamics. And most importantly, she knows the consequences of silence. The world is finally getting her perspective, and it is far more damning than anyone could have anticipated. But here's the twist. Maxwell's revelations are not just about Meghan's behavior. They are about power, manipulation, and the hidden rules that govern the lives of the elite. They force us to ask uncomfortable questions. How does someone navigate a world built on secrecy and influence? What is the cost of ambition, fame, and access? And crucially, what happens when the people involved in these scandals are not ordinary citizens, but members of one of the world's most publicized royal families? The answers Maxwell hints at are staggering. They involve strategy, audacity, and a level of moral ambiguity that most of us are unprepared to confront. Now, I know what you're thinking. How much of this is true? How much is sensationalized? Maxwell is a convicted felon. Her motives could be questioned. But remember this: the very act of choosing to reveal these secrets, even in fragments, carries weight. It is an admission that the events she witnessed were significant enough to demand exposure. And for the audience, the allure is irresistible. The possibility that behind Meghan's polished public persona lies a story intertwined with scandal, danger, and power plays is exactly the kind of revelation that history and gossip thrives upon. Imagine for a moment being in Maxwell's position, watching the interactions unfold, knowing that you have the knowledge, the memory, and potentially the evidence to change narratives, ruin reputations, or protect others. Imagine the ethical and emotional turmoil of witnessing behavior that challenges not only public perception but personal judgment. Maxwell's account forces us to consider perspective. She was there, and she saw things the public will never know. And by choosing to share her version, she is controlling the narrative, challenging the royal image, and planting seeds of doubt that may never be fully dispelled. And yet, despite all this, we are only at the beginning. Maxwell's claims hint at layers beneath layers of deception, strategy, and calculated action. They suggest that Meghan's rise, her connections, and her behavior in certain high-profile social circles were not merely happenstance, but part of a complex web that Maxwell observed firsthand. It is a story about influence, control, and the calculated use of relationships to achieve goals. Goals that may have seemed glamorous on the surface, but were anything but simple behind closed doors. So, as we step into this story, prepare yourself. This is not a tale for the faint of heart. It is a narrative of power, scandal, and shocking revelations that could alter the way the world perceives one of the most prominent figures in modern royalty. Maxwell's perspective is raw, unfiltered, and unprecedented. And while skepticism is natural, and indeed healthy, the depth of detail she provides, the specificity of her recollections, and the context she offers make it impossible to ignore. Finally, let's end this introduction with a question that will linger in your mind as we dive deeper. What did Maxwell see that night? What did she witness that has remained hidden from the public for so long? And how does Meghan Markle's involvement, as alleged, shift the narrative we thought we understood about the monarchy, scandal, and ambition? And the answer is coming in the next chapter. But what comes next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if I told you that before Meghan Markle ever stepped foot in the royal spotlight, before headlines and tabloids splashed her face across the globe, there was someone who saw everything, someone who operated in the shadows of power, someone whose presence in the Epstein network was not just significant, it was pivotal. That person is Ghislaine Maxwell. And according to what she has now revealed, she witnessed events so intimate, so scandalous, and so meticulously orchestrated that even the most seasoned observers of high society would be left stunned. Maxwell's life reads like a thriller novel. Born into wealth, privilege, and controversy, she grew up surrounded by influence. Her father, Robert Maxwell, a media magnate whose empire crumbled in scandal and mystery, shaped her understanding of power. She learned early that access, discretion, and strategic alliances were currency. By the time she met Jeffrey Epstein, she had already been immersed in a world where secrets were gold and visibility could be dangerous. Epstein, with his wealth, connections, and global reach, became her partner in influence, and, according to many accounts, the architect of some of the darkest games of control and manipulation the elite had ever witnessed. Now imagine being in her shoes. Every day, Maxwell moved through private homes, private planes, luxury estates, and clandestine gatherings where the rich and powerful mingled. Every encounter was a chess move, Every smile, handshake, and casual conversation was a potential leverage point. She saw men and women who could destroy reputations with a whisper and watched as they wielded that power effortlessly. And in that environment, Meghan Markle, at that point, a rising actress with Hollywood connections, entered the picture. Maxwell's claim is startling. She says she saw Meghan in interactions that were intimate, calculated, and executed in front of people who were accustomed to secrecy. Not just Prince Andrew, not just Epstein, but a room where power dynamics shifted with every glance. Maxwell, positioned at the edge of the scene, witnessed behaviors and choices that, if true, would have been devastating if exposed. And she had the memory, the insight, and the audacity to recall them now. Years later, behind bars, where her revelations carry a weight that is both chilling and unavoidable. It's important to understand why Maxwell's perspective matters. She wasn't a passive observer. She was an active participant in the social ecosystem that allowed Epstein to operate with impunity. She understood the rules, the hierarchy, and the consequences of exposure. That understanding gives her testimony a unique credibility. Maxwell isn't just recounting gossip. She's recalling calculated interactions, power plays, and the subtle ways influence is exercised among the elite. And when she claims that Meghan Markle was involved in intimate interactions in this environment, it is not a casual allegation. It is a statement coming from someone whose life has been defined by observing, recording, and, when necessary, controlling these very situations. Let's pause for a moment and consider the psychological landscape. Maxwell had to navigate her own survival while observing others' manipulations. Imagine the tension of watching interactions that could have severe consequences for everyone involved. Imagine the fear, the anticipation, and the strategic calculation required to decide when to speak, when to act, and when to remain silent. Maxwell's insight into Meghan, Andrew, and Epstein comes from a place of intense observation, a position few people could ever comprehend. Her revelations aren't just about salacious details. They are about human behavior at its most calculated, its most self-serving, and its most morally ambiguous. Now, what about Meghan Markle? Maxwell claims that Meghan was aware of the stakes in these environments, and according to her account, she acted with a combination of ambition, calculation, and social intelligence that allowed her to navigate circles few outsiders could penetrate. Maxwell recounts interactions where Meghan was not merely a passive participant, but an active agent, making decisions that influenced not just her image but the dynamics of the room. Every move, every glance, every smile carried weight. And Maxwell, watching from the sidelines, recognized patterns that, in retrospect, suggested awareness and perhaps intent. Consider the implications of Maxwell's observations. Here is a woman, intimately connected to Epstein, who claims to have witnessed Meghan Markle in circumstances that would be explosive if revealed publicly. This is not a casual meeting at a charity gala or a public appearance designed for optics. According to Maxwell, these were private moments, orchestrated in environments that were carefully controlled, environments where power, secrecy, and influence intersected in ways that left no room for error. Every person in that room had something to lose, and every interaction carried potential consequences. Maxwell also provides context that many have overlooked, the hierarchy of power in these settings. Prince Andrew, with his status and connections, wielded influence effortlessly, while Epstein's reach extended across continents and industries. Meghan, entering this world, had to understand the stakes or risk being consumed by them. Maxwell's account suggests that Meghan did understand, at least on some level. She moved with awareness, navigated interactions strategically, and engaged in behaviors that, for the untrained eye, may have seemed innocuous. But for Maxwell, trained in the observation of elite manipulation, these behaviors were significant. There's another layer here, one that Maxwell emphasizes repeatedly: the psychological impact of the environment itself. The luxury, the secrecy, the constant surveillance by those who were experts in power dynamics. This created pressure, tension, and behavioral cues that most people would find overwhelming. Maxwell describes how individuals adapted, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, to these pressures. She claims that Meghan Markle's actions were informed by this high-stakes environment, a mixture of self-preservation, ambition, and social intelligence that allowed her to thrive, or at least survive, where others might falter. And yet, Maxwell's account is not purely analytical. She includes emotional beats, moments of astonishment, fear, and even admiration. Maxwell is candid about her reactions to what she witnessed, describing moments where Meghan's choices left her speechless, moments where power dynamics shifted in ways that were almost cinematic in their intensity. For the audience, these insights provide not just scandal, but human complexity. A glimpse into the strategic thinking, ambition, and audacity that can define behavior in elite circles. Maxwell's credibility, of course, is debated. She is a convicted felon, a figure vilified in the media, and someone whose motives can reasonably be questioned. But one cannot ignore the specificity of her accounts, the way she recalls sequences of events, the consistency of her observations, and the broader context she provides. Even skeptics would acknowledge that Maxwell's proximity to Epstein, Andrew, and others places her in a unique position to observe truth, nuance, and behavior that no outsider could ever see. And it is from this vantage point that she claims to have witnessed Meghan Markle's involvement in moments that could, if true, redefine public understanding of her path to royalty. Maxwell also hints at dynamics that go beyond individual actions. She claims that the interactions she observed were part of broader social strategies, power plays, and hierarchies that governed elite networks. Meghan Markle, according to Maxwell, was not just navigating a single encounter, but an entire ecosystem of influence, where each interaction could ripple through relationships, reputations, and public perception. These dynamics add layers of complexity to Maxwell's revelations, suggesting that understanding Meghan's behavior requires more than speculation. It requires insight into the structures of influence that govern elite behavior. Finally, as this chapter closes, consider the weight of Maxwell's claim. She positions herself not just as a witness, but as a gatekeeper of memory, a chronicler of events that many may never know. She asserts that her observations of Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and Epstein are more than anecdotes. They are pieces of a puzzle that reveal hidden patterns of behavior, ambition, and influence. The connections she draws are unsettling, the implications vast, and the potential fallout monumental. And now, as we prepare to move deeper into this story, a question hangs in the air. What exactly did Maxwell witness in those private rooms, behind closed doors, where power, secrecy, and intimacy collided? The answer to that question begins in the next chapter. But what Maxwell reveals there will shock you in ways you cannot yet imagine. What happens when secrets that were meant to be buried for decades start to surface, and the people involved are not ordinary citizens, but members of one of the world's most scrutinized families? The British royal family has long maintained an image of tradition, dignity, and propriety. Yet behind closed doors, according to Maxwell, there existed a labyrinth of secrecy, hidden alliances, and encounters that would shock the public if ever exposed. And Meghan Markle, newly arrived, ambitious, and navigating the treacherous waters of royal life, was allegedly at the center of events that few could have anticipated. Maxwell's account begins with the parties, the gatherings, and the private interactions that rarely reach the press. She claims to have witnessed spaces where royals, socialites, and high-profile guests mingled, but where the rules of behavior were unspoken yet strictly enforced. It was a world of observation, influence, and discretion, where every glance and gesture could shift alliances or ruin reputations. And in this context, Maxwell says Meghan was far from naive. She was observing, calculating, and acting, aware of the stakes yet audacious enough to navigate the game with a confidence that surprised even seasoned insiders. Think about what it means to move through such a world. These weren't casual parties or charity galas designed for optics. These were controlled environments, often private estates or secluded mansions, where behavior could be monitored and recorded, and where every participant understood that discretion was paramount. Maxwell emphasizes that these gatherings were carefully orchestrated, each guest, each interaction, and each conversation part of a broader social ecosystem where influence was the ultimate currency. It is within these walls that Maxwell claims Meghan's interactions with Prince Andrew and others unfolded, interactions that were intimate, calculated, and according to Maxwell, potentially explosive. Maxwell's credibility rests not only on her proximity, but on her ability to recall details with specificity. She describes the layout of rooms, the positions of guests, and the subtle gestures that indicated power dynamics. In her eyes, Meghan's behavior was noteworthy, not for its public glamour, but for the way it engaged with the underlying social architecture. Each choice Meghan made, how she spoke, where she positioned herself, whom she addressed, was laden with meaning, observed and interpreted by Maxwell as a masterclass in strategic social navigation. But this chapter isn't just about Meghan. It's about the entire environment in which these events occurred. Maxwell paints a picture of a world where the royals themselves were not immune to manipulation, where even those born into privilege had to contend with networks of power that extended far beyond the palace walls. Epstein's influence loomed large, not only financially but socially, and Maxwell positions herself as both participant and observer, privy to behaviors that were hidden from public view. The combination of royal privilege and clandestine interactions created a perfect storm of secrecy, ambition, and risk. Here's where it gets even more shocking. Maxwell suggests that the very rituals of royal life, the dinners, gatherings, and behind-the-scenes meetings, were not merely ceremonial, but were often used as instruments of influence. Individuals were observed, tested, and sometimes manipulated to see how they would respond under pressure. According to Maxwell, Meghan Markle was entering a world where her every move could be scrutinized, recorded, and interpreted. And in doing so, she may have inadvertently, or perhaps deliberately, placed herself in situations of immense vulnerability and visibility. Consider the dynamics between Meghan and Prince Andrew. Maxwell alleges that there were moments of intimacy in these private settings, moments that were not only shocking but deeply consequential. While public discourse often paints the royals as rigid and formal, Maxwell's account depicts a far more complex reality, one where human desire, ambition, and power intersected in ways that few outside the inner circle could comprehend. Meghan's behavior, as observed by Maxwell, was a balancing act of charm, strategy, and awareness, a mixture of caution and boldness that kept her both noticed and enigmatic. Maxwell further explains the tension that existed among the guests. Social hierarchies were subtle yet potent. The royals, while powerful, were not omnipotent. Epstein's influence, his network of elite associates, and Maxwell's own position created an environment where status was constantly negotiated. Meghan's introduction to this world was sudden, her learning curve steep, and her ability to adapt under scrutiny both necessary and remarkable. Maxwell notes that observing someone navigate this environment successfully is a rare opportunity, and that Meghan's performance, for lack of a better word, was memorable. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Maxwell's revelations is what she claims was the awareness of those involved. According to her, the participants understood the consequences of exposure, the weight of public perception, and the potential damage to personal and familial reputations. And yet, in these private moments, the boundaries between personal desire, calculated influence, and social survival became blurred. Maxwell asserts that Meghan's actions, witnessed firsthand, existed in this gray area, a space where strategy and intimacy collided with consequences that could be devastating if ever revealed. Maxwell also highlights the emotional toll of this environment. She describes the fear, tension, and anticipation that permeated these gatherings. Every interaction was an opportunity to gain favor or lose credibility. Every whispered conversation could shift the balance of power. And Meghan, newly arrived and ambitious, was learning these rules while under constant observation, not only by the royals themselves, but by someone like Maxwell, who understood the stakes with precision. This layer of observation, Maxwell emphasizes, adds depth and gravity to her account. The secrecy surrounding these interactions also raises questions about the culture within the royal circles and their associates. Maxwell claims that the environment encouraged a combination of performance and discretion. People had to present a polished exterior while navigating the private realities of power and influence. Meghan, according to Maxwell, engaged with this culture actively, sometimes successfully, sometimes dangerously. And Maxwell's observations suggest that the consequences of missteps, or revelations, were significant, potentially affecting reputations, careers, and public perception in ways few could anticipate. Now, here's a critical point. Maxwell asserts that what she witnessed was not isolated. It was part of a pattern, a series of interactions that reflected deeper social and political dynamics. The private gatherings, the strategic placements of guests, and the behaviors of the royals and their associates all reflected a complex network of influence that Meghan had entered. Maxwell's role as observer gave her the perspective to recognize these patterns and understand their implications. By now, you might be asking yourself, why is this significant? Why should the public care about what happened behind closed doors in royal circles? The answer is simple. Maxwell's account does more than reveal potential scandals. It exposes the machinery of power, ambition, and manipulation that shapes the lives of public figures. It challenges the perception of Meghan Markle as merely a celebrity-turned-duchess and positions her as an active participant in a world where strategy, influence, and visibility are paramount. The implications are profound, not only for Meghan but for the royal family, the public, and anyone fascinated by the intersection of celebrity, power, and secrecy. And Maxwell doesn't stop there. She hints at moments of tension, conflict, and human drama that went far beyond social maneuvering. According to her, there were incidents that, if corroborated, would redefine our understanding of Meghan's early years in the royal sphere and the risks she navigated. These are moments of vulnerability, audacity, and consequence, all unfolding in environments designed to maintain control, secrecy, and influence. So as we close this chapter, ask yourself this. What does it mean when the carefully curated image of a royal figure is contrasted with the private reality observed by someone like Maxwell? How much of what we see in public is performance, and how much is shaped by calculated strategy in environments where stakes are as high as reputation and power? The answers to these questions, and the shocking details of Meghan's interactions with Andrew and Epstein, are coming in the next chapter. But what Maxwell reveals next will make you question everything you thought you knew about the royals, the Epstein network, and Meghan Markle herself. What if the most shocking moment wasn't hidden in public records, tabloids, or leaked emails, but behind the closed doors of a private estate where only a select few dared to enter? Ghislaine Maxwell claims that she witnessed something that night, something intimate, calculated, and deeply consequential, that would forever change how the world perceives Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and the twisted circles of influence surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell describes the setting with painstaking detail, a sprawling estate, dimly lit, designed to foster both luxury and privacy. The guests were a mixture of high-profile elites, powerful figures, and those who wielded influence without question. Every room was strategically arranged to facilitate social observation. Every conversation was an opportunity for leverage. And in this calculated environment, Maxwell says Meghan Markle entered the room with a presence that drew attention, a combination of charm, confidence, and keen awareness that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. According to Maxwell, Prince Andrew was already present, exuding the casual authority of someone born into privilege but fully aware of the consequences of his associations. Epstein, as ever, was a shadowy presence, orchestrating interactions with a mix of subtle encouragement and careful observation. Maxwell positions herself as a silent observer, noting gestures, glances, and conversations that hinted at the stakes involved. It wasn't just about who was in the room. It was about what was being communicated through body language, positioning, and timing. Then, Maxwell claims, the encounter unfolded. What she describes is not sensationalized gossip, but a sequence of interactions that were intimate, yet orchestrated, in a way that blended personal choice with social calculation. Meghan, Maxwell says, was engaging directly with Andrew in front of Epstein, navigating a complex dynamic of attention, power, and visibility. Each movement, each smile, each word carried weight. Maxwell's account emphasizes that the environment amplified every gesture. In that room, nothing went unnoticed, and the consequences of missteps were immediate and unforgiving. Maxwell also highlights Meghan's awareness. She was not passive. She observed, responded, and interacted in ways that reflected her understanding of the hierarchy. Maxwell describes moments where Meghan adjusted her posture, redirected conversations, and managed attention strategically. To the casual observer, these may have seemed like minor social maneuvers, but Maxwell, trained in observation and intimately familiar with the stakes, recognized them as calculated, high-stakes behavior. Every choice Meghan made was observed, interpreted, and remembered. The tension in the room, according to Maxwell, was palpable. Epstein's presence added a layer of unease. His influence over the dynamics was subtle but undeniable. Andrew, while confident, was aware that he was being observed and assessed by someone who understood both the social rules and the consequences of exposure. Maxwell claims that the interplay between Andrew and Meghan was charged not only with intimacy, but with a clear understanding of who was watching, who held power, and what could be gained or lost through their interactions. But Maxwell's account isn't just about observation. It's about the moral and emotional complexity of the moment. She describes her own reactions, astonishment, disbelief, and a sense of foreboding. Maxwell emphasizes that witnessing such interactions in real time creates a tension that is impossible to convey in second-hand accounts. There is a visceral impact, a human response to seeing power, ambition, and intimacy collide in ways that challenge both ethics and perception. She saw behavior that was audacious, manipulative, and strategic, all unfolding in a room where consequences were immediate and inescapable. Maxwell also delves into the psychological dynamics at play. She describes how Epstein's influence created a climate where participants were simultaneously aware of their autonomy and constrained by the network of power surrounding them. Meghan's actions, Maxwell asserts, were a blend of personal agency and strategic adaptation to an environment that demanded both visibility and discretion. Andrew's responses, similarly, reflected a negotiation of power, influence, and social expectation. And Maxwell, standing on the periphery, interpreted every nuance with clarity and precision. The implications of this encounter are staggering. Maxwell suggests that Meghan's involvement was not accidental. She was engaging with powerful figures in a high-stakes environment, aware of the consequences and potential fallout. The encounter, she claims, was both intimate and strategic, a performance calibrated to achieve specific social and personal objectives. Maxwell's testimony positions Meghan as an active participant in a narrative that intertwines ambition, influence, and complex human behavior. What makes Maxwell's account even more compelling is the layered observation she provides. She describes subtle cues, how Meghan positioned herself in relation to Andrew, the timing of her interactions, and the way she managed attention within the room. Maxwell interprets these as conscious decisions, evidence of a nuanced understanding of the social hierarchy. For the audience, this is more than scandal. It's insight into the strategic behavior of a public figure navigating one of the most challenging environments imaginable. Maxwell also points out that this encounter had ripple effects. Observers outside the immediate interaction began to react, subtly adjusting their behavior based on what they perceived. Alliances shifted, attention was redirected, and power dynamics evolved in real time. Maxwell's ability to track these nuances and her interpretation of the implications adds credibility and depth to her claims. This wasn't a simple social gathering. It was a high-stakes social experiment unfolding before her eyes. And then there is the human element. Maxwell emphasizes the vulnerability, courage, and calculated risk inherent in the encounter. Meghan, according to Maxwell, was aware of the exposure, understood the consequences, and engaged with both caution and audacity. Andrew, similarly, was navigating a situation that demanded confidence, charm, and awareness. Epstein's influence loomed over every decision, creating a layer of tension that heightened the stakes. Maxwell's description captures the emotional complexity, showing how individuals navigate environments where every gesture is scrutinized and every choice carries potential consequences. The encounter, Maxwell claims, ended in a way that left a lasting impression. She describes a combination of relief, tension, and astonishment among the participants. The room, once charged with strategic calculation, settled into a temporary equilibrium. But Maxwell notes that the implications of what transpired were far from over. In her mind, this single encounter represented a turning point, a moment that would echo through the social, psychological, and public narratives surrounding the individuals involved. So as we close this chapter, the question for the audience is unavoidable. What exactly happened in that room? What choices did Meghan make, and how did Andrew respond? And how does this intimate, calculated encounter fit into the broader network of influence and secrecy surrounding Epstein and Maxwell? The answer to that question, and the shocking details that follow, will come in the next chapter. But Maxwell warns, what you are about to hear next will challenge everything you thought you knew about the royals, their private interactions, and the true nature of Meghan Markle's early years in this shadowed world. What if I told you that the true architect behind many of the events Maxwell witnessed wasn't just a bystander, but a man whose influence reached into every corner of this elite circle? Jeffrey Epstein. His presence was not incidental. It was central. Maxwell repeatedly emphasizes that Epstein was more than a financier or socialite. He was a puppeteer, orchestrating encounters, managing appearances, and subtly manipulating behavior to ensure control over everyone in the room. And in that world, Meghan Markle found herself navigating a landscape that was as psychologically treacherous as it was socially charged. Maxwell describes Epstein as a master of influence, someone who understood the levers of power better than almost anyone alive. His wealth was staggering, yes, but it was the combination of financial leverage, social connections, and psychological manipulation that made him dangerous. According to Maxwell, he had an uncanny ability to assess people instantly, their desires, vulnerabilities, and ambitions. And he used that knowledge strategically, often positioning individuals in scenarios where their behavior could be observed, tested, and recorded, sometimes for leverage, sometimes for entertainment, sometimes for both. This is where Meghan Markle enters a perilous environment. Maxwell claims that Meghan, ambitious and socially adept, was aware, on some level, that Epstein's influence extended far beyond what casual observers could perceive. Epstein's reputation, his connections to powerful figures across governments, finance, and royalty, created an ecosystem where every move was monitored, every interaction had consequence, and every decision carried potential exposure. Maxwell emphasizes that being in Epstein's orbit was not just about attending parties or meetings. It was about survival, strategy, and an unspoken understanding of the rules of engagement. Maxwell paints a picture of Epstein's methodical approach. He would orchestrate gatherings with precision, carefully curating guest lists to include individuals whose interactions he could observe and subtly influence. He understood psychology. He understood leverage. He understood the dynamics of social hierarchy, ambition, and secrecy. Maxwell recounts observing moments where Epstein would quietly redirect conversations, encourage certain behaviors, or even manipulate attention within a room to achieve a desired effect. In these instances, Meghan's presence was significant, not because she was naive, but because she was navigating an environment where Epstein's control was both invisible and absolute. Consider, for a moment, the emotional stakes Maxwell describes. Being in Epstein's orbit was inherently tense. Every smile, handshake, and conversation could carry hidden meaning. Every action could be interpreted, leveraged, or used against someone. And Maxwell, ever observant, recognized the delicate balance required to maintain composure, protect oneself, and navigate the complex web of influence. According to her account, Meghan engaged in this balancing act with awareness, charm, and strategic acumen, but the room's dynamics were unforgiving. One misstep could have serious repercussions. Maxwell also emphasizes Epstein's psychological manipulation. She recalls instances where he subtly tested individuals, observing their reactions under pressure, gauging loyalty, and measuring ambition. These tests were rarely overt. They were embedded in social cues, orchestrated conversations, and the controlled setting of private estates. Maxwell suggests that Meghan's interactions with Andrew, observed by Epstein, were not happenstance. They were influenced, intentionally or unintentionally, by Epstein's orchestrated environment. The intimacy, tension, and calculated behavior Maxwell claims to have witnessed were shaped by his pervasive influence. This environment, Maxwell asserts, also allowed her to understand patterns of behavior. She claims that Epstein's presence created a climate where individuals were simultaneously empowered and constrained. The royals, with their privilege and status, were accustomed to control, but Epstein introduced variables that complicated even the most confident of players. Meghan, entering this sphere, had to navigate a world where visibility, influence, and leverage intersected in unpredictable ways. Maxwell's observations suggest that Meghan's behavior reflected both adaptation and calculation, responding to a subtle but omnipresent force. Maxwell describes the subtle ways Epstein exerted control over the room. It wasn't through overt coercion, but through positioning, influence, and careful observation. He would direct attention, arrange interactions, and create situations that revealed vulnerabilities, alliances, or ambitions. Every participant in these gatherings was subtly aware that their actions could have consequences, and Maxwell positions Meghan as someone negotiating this high-stakes environment with both awareness and strategy. Moreover, Maxwell highlights Epstein's ability to remain in the shadows while maintaining absolute influence. He was both observer and orchestrator, manipulating interactions without the need for overt action. This duality allowed him to maintain control, gather intelligence, and ensure compliance. Meghan, Maxwell asserts, was navigating not only the social expectations of the royals, but also the invisible, psychological influence of Epstein, a force that shaped behavior, strategy, and perception in ways few could resist. The implications of this are profound. Maxwell's account suggests that Meghan's early experiences in elite social circles were profoundly influenced by the orchestrated environment Epstein created. The encounters she had, the behaviors she exhibited, and the interactions she navigated were all part of a landscape where power, influence, and strategy intersected. Maxwell's role as observer allows her to highlight patterns, draw connections, and reveal the unseen forces that shaped what unfolded. Forces that extended far beyond simple social interactions and into the realm of psychological and strategic influence. Maxwell's observations also provide insight into the moral complexity of these encounters. She describes the tension, the risk, and the calculated decisions made by all involved. The interactions she witnessed, particularly those involving Meghan and Andrew, were not merely social. They were strategic, navigated with awareness of the potential consequences, and shaped by the subtle, pervasive influence of Epstein. Maxwell underscores that understanding these dynamics is essential to comprehending the gravity of what she claims to have seen. And yet, despite the orchestrated environment and the power dynamics at play, Maxwell notes moments of human unpredictability. Meghan's choices, Andrew's responses, and Epstein's management of the room combined to create a scenario that was both calculated and emotionally charged. Maxwell emphasizes that the complexity of these interactions, intimate, strategic, and high stakes, cannot be fully appreciated without considering the psychological landscape, the social hierarchy, and the pervasive influence of Epstein. By now, the picture is clear. Epstein was the linchpin, the central figure whose influence shaped not only the environment but the behaviors of those within it. Meghan Markle, entering this world, was navigating forces she could only partially anticipate. Maxwell's testimony suggests that her actions, her awareness, and her interactions were profoundly shaped by the environment Epstein controlled, an environment where power, observation, and manipulation were inseparable. As this chapter closes, the question for the audience is unavoidable. How much of what Meghan did was influenced by Epstein's orchestration? How aware was she of the stakes, the surveillance, and the social calculation in play? Maxwell's next revelations promise to answer these questions, and what she witnessed next will deepen the shock, revealing layers of intimacy, strategy, and consequence that few could have imagined. But what comes next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine the scene. A private gathering, whispers echoing through ornate hallways, and the walls of the palace quietly absorbing a scandal that, if revealed, could shake centuries of tradition. According to Maxwell, once the events involving Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and Epstein became known internally, even in fragmentary form, the reaction within the palace was swift, calculated, and colder than anyone outside could have anticipated. And it wasn't just about damage control. It was about protecting the institution, the reputation, and the fragile perception of a family that operates under constant public scrutiny. Maxwell claims that as soon as word reached certain palace officials, a series of immediate measures were put in motion. Couriers delivered discreet messages. Aides were instructed to monitor media reports. Security protocols were tightened. The palace, she asserts, functions as a well-oiled machine when it comes to preserving image. Every leak, every rumor, and every public hint of scandal is treated as a potential threat to the monarchy's authority. And this particular scandal? Maxwell suggests it was perceived as one of the most dangerous in recent memory, an intersection of royalty, scandal, and the shadow of Epstein's influence. Maxwell's account paints the palace not just as an administrative hub, but as a psychological battlefield. Behind the closed doors, senior royals and advisors reportedly grappled with questions that were both practical and moral. How do we contain this? How do we protect the family? How do we prevent public fallout while managing internal tensions? Maxwell observed, according to her claims, a heightened level of anxiety among aides and courtiers alike. Staff who had been loyal for decades were suddenly unsure how to act, fearing that any misstep could exacerbate the situation. The reaction, Maxwell says, was layered. On the surface, there were official communications emphasizing normalcy, tradition, and decorum. Publicly, everything continued as usual. Royal engagements, charitable appearances, and ceremonial events went forward without interruption. But beneath the surface, the palace was in a state of calculated agitation. Advisors were reportedly reassigned to monitor Meghan's interactions. Andrew's contacts were reviewed for potential vulnerabilities. Maxwell hints that some individuals were quietly briefed on the unfolding scenario, tasked with assessing risks and ensuring compliance with the monarchy's expectations. Maxwell emphasizes the irony of this internal crisis. The royals, accustomed to controlling narratives through PR teams, strategic appearances, and the aura of duty, were now confronting a scenario they could not entirely predict or manage. The intrusion of Maxwell's observations into their private calculations exposed a vulnerability that was rarely acknowledged publicly. Even centuries-old institutions are susceptible to human unpredictability, ambition, and exposure. And Meghan Markle, newly integrated into this hierarchy, was an unexpected variable, a figure whose influence, behavior, and decisions were being scrutinized more closely than anyone outside the inner circle could imagine. One particularly striking detail Maxwell shares is how rumors, even when unconfirmed, trigger chain reactions within the palace. According to her, as whispers about the encounters circulated, subtly, discreetly, and often without clear verification, staff began operating under heightened alert. Courtiers who had once focused on ceremonial precision were suddenly drawn into surveillance, observation, and information gathering. Maxwell notes that the palace's reaction was both systematic and instinctive, a blend of protocol and panic designed to preempt scandal before it reached public consciousness. Maxwell also recounts moments of human emotion amidst the operational efficiency. She observed aides whispering behind closed doors, advisors exchanging cautious glances, and senior figures issuing instructions that carried both authority and urgency. Fear, tension, and calculation coexisted in the palace's corridors. Maxwell's descriptions convey the emotional toll on those tasked with managing both family reputation and public perception, a balancing act that required both diplomacy and subtlety. At the heart of Maxwell's account is the idea that Meghan Markle represented a disruption. Not because she was inherently scandalous, Maxwell insists, but because her presence intersected with existing vulnerabilities within the royal ecosystem. Andrew's prior connections, Epstein's influence, and the palace's obsession with secrecy created an environment where any deviation from expected behavior could have catastrophic consequences. Meghan's actions, as observed in the private setting Maxwell describes, catalyzed a reaction that rippled through the palace hierarchy, prompting both preventative measures and quiet anxiety. The response was not limited to logistical measures. Maxwell claims there were strategic communications as well. Whispers to media contacts, discreet conversations with legal advisors, and subtle signals to associates designed to ensure loyalty and discretion. Even seemingly minor interactions were scrutinized for signs of information leakage. Maxwell emphasizes that the palace's reaction was almost surgical, meticulous, deliberate, and constantly adapting to new information. Every step was designed to manage perception while protecting the monarchy's image. But it wasn't just about control. It was also about calculation. Maxwell suggests that senior figures understood the potential ramifications if news of Meghan's interactions leaked publicly. Not only could the family face reputational damage, but the narrative could shift in ways that undermined centuries of authority. Maxwell recounts how advisors considered multiple contingencies: public denial, selective disclosure, and targeted interventions. The palace, she implies, operates in a world where foresight, strategy, and preemptive action are essential. Maxwell also highlights the personal toll. Royals and aides alike face stress, uncertainty, and moral dilemmas. The very people entrusted with preserving dignity were forced to navigate ethical gray areas, whether to intervene, conceal, or confront. Maxwell's observations suggest that the palace's reaction was as much about managing human behavior as it was about controlling public perception. Individuals were caught between loyalty, personal judgment, and the institutional imperative to maintain secrecy. The irony, Maxwell notes, is that while the palace operates under strict protocol, unpredictability remains a constant threat. Meghan Markle's behavior, Andrew's responses, and Epstein's influence created a scenario where calculated risk intersected with human unpredictability. Maxwell emphasizes that even the most seasoned advisors were challenged, forced to make decisions in real time with incomplete information, a situation fraught with tension, consequence, and potential scandal. As this chapter draws to a close, Maxwell foreshadows the next layer of revelation. While the palace was reacting, Meghan's own strategic moves continued to unfold. Maxwell hints that Meghan's awareness, choices, and calculated responses were not passive. They were shaping the narrative even as the palace scrambled to contain it. The interplay between Meghan's agency and the palace's defensive measures created a dynamic that was both precarious and revealing. So, the question remains, how did Meghan navigate the palace's response? What strategic choices did she make in real time to manage scrutiny, observation, and power dynamics? Maxwell's next revelations promise to answer these questions, and what comes next will push the boundaries of what you thought you knew about both Meghan Markle and the institution she married into. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if Meghan Markle, newly minted into the royal family, wasn't just navigating palace life by chance? What if every smile, every handshake, every glance was part of a calculated strategy, a subtle orchestration designed to maintain her position, influence power, and manipulate perception? According to Ghislaine Maxwell, this was exactly what she observed: a young woman in a high-stakes world, thinking several moves ahead while surrounded by figures whose influence could make or break her future. Maxwell describes Meghan as intensely aware, perceptive, and quick to adapt. She observed Meghan navigating interactions with Andrew, Epstein, and other high-profile figures with a level of social intelligence that Maxwell says was rare even in elite circles. Every gesture seemed deliberate: a tilt of the head to signal attentiveness, a pause in conversation to allow for reaction, a smile timed to convey warmth without vulnerability. Maxwell emphasizes that Meghan's awareness extended beyond the immediate room. She understood the networks, hierarchies, and potential consequences that surrounded her. The palace, Maxwell claims, presented a complex social landscape. It wasn't just about etiquette or ceremony. It was a game of influence and observation. Courtiers watched, aides whispered, and advisors calculated risk. Meghan, as Maxwell notes, entered this environment armed not with a manual, but with instinct, ambition, and a finely tuned sense of strategy. She understood that in a world where visibility and perception define reality, every choice matters. According to Maxwell, Meghan's strategy involved several layers. First, she cultivated relationships selectively, identifying allies who could support her position while minimizing exposure to potential threats. Maxwell observed her engaging with individuals in a way that balanced charm, authority, and discretion, a mix of accessibility and control. Second, Meghan managed attention skillfully. She knew when to assert herself, when to defer, and when to allow others to take the spotlight. Maxwell describes this as a delicate dance, a calculated rhythm that allowed Meghan to remain central without appearing overtly ambitious. But it wasn't only social maneuvering. Maxwell asserts that Meghan also employed psychological strategy. She understood the dynamics of observation, who was watching, what they were assessing, and how her actions could influence perception. Maxwell notes moments where Meghan appeared to test reactions subtly, gauging responses to determine alliances, vulnerabilities, and potential leverage. In these instances, Meghan's behavior was both conscious and calculated, a blend of instinct, intelligence, and deliberate action. Maxwell also recounts the context of high-pressure scenarios, where Meghan's decisions carried immediate implications. Interactions with Andrew, observed by Maxwell and influenced by Epstein's presence, were not casual. They were tests of poise, negotiation, and social intelligence. Meghan's responses, Maxwell claims, reflected an understanding of both opportunity and risk. She was aware that her conduct could have long-term implications for reputation, alliances, and visibility. One particularly striking detail Maxwell emphasizes is Meghan's ability to navigate conflicting interests. Andrew's position, Epstein's influence, and the palace's expectations created a situation where alignment and strategy were paramount. Maxwell describes moments where Meghan acted in ways that balanced these pressures, maintaining composure while subtly advancing her own objectives. Every word, gesture, and interaction was a move in a high-stakes game, observed by those who understood both the rules and the consequences. Maxwell's account also suggests that Meghan's strategy was adaptive. She responded to social cues, shifted approaches when necessary, and capitalized on opportunities as they arose. Maxwell observed her managing attention carefully, signaling loyalty where required, asserting independence when safe, and maintaining an image that balanced charm, authority, and discretion. In this environment, Maxwell notes, strategic acumen was not optional, it was survival. There's also an ethical dimension in Maxwell's observations. She emphasizes that Meghan's behavior, while calculated, operated in a morally complex space. The private setting, high stakes, and power dynamics created situations where choice was constrained, yet perception mattered above all else. Maxwell portrays Meghan as navigating these choices with awareness, using social intelligence to maintain control without exposing vulnerability, a delicate balance in a world where mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. Maxwell further details the emotional resilience Meghan displayed. Navigating the palace's power structures, Epstein's influence, and Andrew's presence required not only strategy, but psychological fortitude. Maxwell claims she observed Meghan managing stress, interpreting cues, and responding under pressure with an almost tactical precision. This resilience, combined with strategic social intelligence, allowed Meghan to maintain presence and influence even in environments charged with risk and observation. Perhaps most revealing is Maxwell's description of Meghan's anticipatory thinking. She seemed to predict responses, gauge potential outcomes, and act preemptively to manage perception. Maxwell suggests that this forward-thinking approach was essential to her survival and effectiveness within the complex social ecosystem of the palace and Epstein's network. Meghan's strategy, in Maxwell's account, was not reactive, it was proactive, orchestrated, and informed by acute awareness of both immediate and long-term consequences. But Maxwell also notes contradictions. Meghan's behavior was at times daring, bold, and assertive, yet calculated, measured, and cautious. She combined confidence with subtlety, ambition with discretion, and charm with tactical restraint. Maxwell emphasizes that this duality is what made Meghan's presence so effective and, to some observers, so disruptive. In an environment designed to control, influence, and manage, Meghan's strategic intelligence allowed her to navigate successfully while challenging existing hierarchies. The audience may ask, did Meghan's strategy cross ethical lines? Did ambition override prudence? Maxwell doesn't provide judgment, but emphasizes observation. She recounts interactions where Meghan's choices had tangible consequences, influencing attention, alliances, and perceptions in the room. In Maxwell's eyes, Meghan's calculated behavior reflected not only social intelligence, but a keen understanding of influence, hierarchy, and survival within a high-stakes environment. Maxwell concludes her observations of Meghan's strategy by noting the impact of these behaviors beyond the immediate room. Each interaction, each decision, had ripple effects, shaping alliances, affecting reputation, and influencing the perception of both insiders and outsiders. Meghan's strategic navigation, Maxwell suggests, was instrumental in establishing her presence, maintaining her influence, and positioning herself in ways that would ultimately affect both her trajectory and the dynamics of those around her. As this chapter closes, Maxwell foreshadows that Meghan's strategy was only the beginning. The next layers of observation, consequence, and revelation involve hidden evidence, interactions that were documented, and behaviors that would challenge not only public perception but institutional authority. The stakes are high, the dynamics complex, and the consequences potentially devastating. So the question remains, how did Meghan's strategy interact with the hidden evidence Maxwell observed? And what does it reveal about power, influence, and the calculated decisions she made behind closed doors? The answers are coming in the next chapter, and what Maxwell reveals next will push the boundaries of scandal, strategy, and royal consequence in ways you cannot yet imagine. What if the most shocking truths were not spoken aloud but quietly documented, captured in messages, glimpsed in photographs, and preserved in subtle details that only a trained observer could notice? According to Ghislaine Maxwell, the events surrounding Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and Jeffrey Epstein were not fleeting moments. They left traces, evidence, and signals that, if interpreted correctly, could rewrite the narrative of everything we thought we knew about the royals and their private circles. Maxwell claims that she witnessed and, in some cases, retained knowledge of communications, photographs, and other forms of documentation that revealed the nature and extent of interactions in these high-stakes gatherings. These were not the casual snapshots of public events or social media posts intended for broad consumption. No, Maxwell refers to hidden messages, subtle recordings, and carefully curated interactions designed to be private, yet inherently traceable to those who understood the context.